Welcome to Massey College. Bienvenue. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers, and I'm the principal of Massey College. Massey College is located on Indigenous land, the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We want to acknowledge their stewardship of the land and express our thanks for being able to gather here to continue to do our work. Today is a special day. It's International Day for Disability, a day where we look around and commit to eliminate all forms of discrimination against people who experience disability. And today is a special day for Massey because we want to dedicate this day to the life and the work of Christine Karza. Christine was a wonderful member of our college. She was present and she animated so many good discussions. And I know that she is with us today because we are trying to pursue our work. Before her passing, she and I had discussed doing something special for December 3rd. And today I'm so glad that we are carrying our wishes. So I want to thank Mattie Noel and Michael O'Shea for helping continue this work. And we hope that we'll do it every year in memory of Christine.
Those are wonderful sentiments on which to begin our program here. Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Paikin. I'm a senior fellow at Massey College, and I am truly honored to have been asked to moderate the discussion that'll take place over the next hour or so as we look into the effects on the disabled communities of our province and country of COVID-19. It's a difficult subject on an important day. I would just parenthetically start by saying I cannot do a discussion, or I cannot participate in a discussion about this subject without acknowledging a guy by the name of David Lepofsky. Many of you will know David. I've known him for probably 35 years. David lost his sight when he was a teenager and has basically spent the next however many years he has lived trying to make a massive difference in this city, province, and country for those who have disabilities of any shape and size. He has the Order of Canada. He has the Order of Ontario. He's been on our program, The Agenda, numerous times. And I think of David when we do discussions on the agenda, as we will actually in a few days. We will do another because I cannot think of another person who has labored so many years in the vineyards to ensure that people with disabilities are able to participate as openly, freely, and fully as possible and reach their potential. So, David, this one's for you, and of course for Christine. I want to introduce our guests who are going to be with us over the next hour, starting with Liv Mendelsohn. She is the Director of Accessibility Inclusion at the Miles Nadal JCC and the Artistic Director of something called the ReelAbilities Film Festival. REEL, ReelAbilities Film Festival. That's a good name for a festival. Michael O'Shea is with us as well. He is a junior fellow and PhD student at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, OISE. And he's got a great Boston accent, and he loves my Red Sox bag that's over my shoulder here. Michael, we look forward to hearing from you today. And Mattie Noel is here. She's a junior fellow and a PhD student at OISE U of T as well. And Mattie, it's so nice to meet you. And you were telling me just before we went on that your mom is a big fan of the agenda, so I already like you the best. No, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. In any event, welcome everybody. And Liv, why don't you get us started here? Tell us about the work you do at the JCC and in particular about the ReelAbilities Film Festival.
All right, thanks, Steve. I gotta say, I gotta echo your shout out to David Lepofsky. I've had some vision loss and he has been just tireless in his advocacy, taking legal avenues and just gathering people to argue for more accessibility. He's an amazing, amazing human being. The JCC, which is just down the road from Massey, has for the past about 6 years been really devoted to trying to create a community center where everyone can follow their interests and their passions together, regardless of accessibility and without barriers. So, if you want to be in a choir with the right supports, whatever your needs, you can be in a choir. If you want to swim, we're going to make sure the environment is right for you. We've installed sprinklers, so folks who are blind can swim without needing guidance and support. We have sprinklers over the lanes so they know where they are in the lanes, for instance. All sorts of things. So it's a great team. And we also particularly support young adults with disabilities who are 18 to 35, who have aged out of so many other programs. And a lot of the way we do that is through the arts, through community arts, and through our film festival, which is a year-round affair with a core festival in May. And it focuses on the stories and art of folks with disabilities and deaf folks, and tries to create a platform for talking about disability culture. So it's a labor of love, and it's a great time.
I have to say, you're very lucky to work at the Miles Nadal, because it's a Spadina and Bloor, and that is a great facility. I don't know how much money they put into that place to bring it up to the condition it's in right now, but it's a terrific place to hang out. Talk to us about Christine Karza. I'm interested in your relationship with her. Christine,
like David, was a giant in this work, and really a fierce advocate, but a warm, compassionate, amazing woman. And Christine was very involved in advocacy in the arts. And so we crossed paths quite a bit. And particularly, she was doing a lot of work with Mirvish around relaxed performances. We work around relaxed screenings, and what that means is creating an environment where you can do whatever you need to do with your body while you enjoy a performance or a screening. And so Christine was really quite a trailblazer, and taking on big arts institutions and both demanding and gently guiding them towards more accessibility.
Okay, let's introduce Michael O'Shea. That is a great Irish Catholic Boston name, isn't it, Michael? Boy, oh boy.
Yeah. So actually,
that's perfect for a guy from Boston.
I'm actually from Chicago, but I found myself in another town with a lot of Irish Catholics. So
okay, let's just pretend I didn't hear that. Let's make up the fact that you're not from Chicago and that you're really from Boston, because I love your accent.
All right, we'll roll with that, Steve.
Tell us about the work that you're doing right now.
Sure. So my work, I'm actually a PhD student at OISE, working on issues around Indigenous student access to higher education. But in addition to that, I had the great pleasure to work with Christine last year through the Massey Mentorship Program. There's a great program at Massey College where they match senior fellows with junior fellows. And I had the chance to be Christine's mentee. And if you know Christine, you know how warm she is. After a single meeting, a single coffee meeting, you feel like you've known her forever. So it was actually with Maddy that we were working on this event, when Christine so suddenly passed.
And just so people don't think I've completely lost my marbles, where are you coming to us from right now?
Yes, I'm currently in Boston.
There we go.
Yeah, and my sort of entry point into this conversation and why I was interested in working with Christine and Maddy is that I have a stutter, stuttered my whole life, and I was, and maybe we'll get to later. I found the challenges to stuttering changing during COVID, and the technological changes that went along with the changes in work and schooling as a result of COVID.
Michael, for what it's worth, if you have a stutter, you too can become president of the United States, because as we all know, that is one of the things that Joe Biden has had to overcome from his childhood. And it doesn't seem to have held him back, and I'm sure it is not holding you back. So bravo.
Thank you.
Let's find out what the Mattie Noel story is. Maddy, come on in here and tell us about what you're up to.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you to Liv and Michael. Also, so my name is, I'm Maddy, and I'm a third year Massey College Junior Fellow, and I'm also a PhD student in my second year at OISE, which is U of T's Faculty of Education. So Michael and I are there, and I'm in the Social Justice Education Department, and I do childhood studies and disability studies. Speaking about Christine, I met Christine in February 2019, and Christine was my, like Michael, one of my Massey Meeting of the Minds mentors, and just was really, really, really lucky to know Christine. Christine cared so deeply about the life and the work of those that she worked with, and I remember Christine would always be open to chat with me about ideas or anything that I was working on or struggling with, and so just really, really grateful to know Christine and to have her. Yeah, so Christine helped, was really instrumental together with me and Michael, and also a Massey College alum, Emily McRae, in developing this dialogue and in talking about accessibility, communication, and the impact of COVID on disabled communities. And it was a joy to work with her, and she really is here with us today. She's graced all of our lives and all of our work, and it's my pleasure to help continue that work in honor of Christine. So that's a bit about me and my work with Christine.
That's beautifully put, Maddy. Tell us what made her such a good mentor.
That's a great question. I would say so many things, but I think one thing that was just so powerful about Christine was that she was always there, no matter what. You know, she would say, like, one of our first meetings, she said to me, you can call me anytime, you can email me anytime, and if it's an emergency, just put emergency or urgent, I need to talk, and we would talk. Christine was a true friend to me. We talked about things that were going on at Massey regarding the Accessibility Committee, but we also talked a lot about things that were just going on in life. We talked about family, about friends, about relationships, and Christine gave me a lot of really, really good advice when I was for how to navigate difficult times, difficult circumstances, difficult decisions. And when I think of what makes a really good mentor, of course, there's that consistency and there's that love and support, but also there's an element of figuring things out together, and of not knowing the answer or the answer right off the bat, but of working towards an answer or a solution that together, and of figuring that out in collaboration. So just a really wonderful, she was just such a wonderful, supportive person, and yeah, I miss her a lot, but very, very happy to be talking about Christine today.
Very nice. Well, we all know you three better now, thanks to this opening round of questions. And we have a better understanding of what you're up to these days. And I guess this is the point in the discussion where I should say, and I don't see it here on my screen, but I bet you, if you are watching this, you probably have it on your screen. There's some kind of chat function whereby you can put in questions. And at a certain point, I'll shut up here and we'll start putting questions from the audience to our guests here. And that way you can participate in this as well. Let's follow up with this. Liv, I suspect that since all three of you come at the issue of disability from a different perspective or different point of view or different space, I want a better understanding of what it means to each of you. So when I say the word accessibility, what does it mean to you?
Accessibility is freedom. Accessibility is, honestly, is love. It's the love that we have for one another in a care in a society. When things are accessible, it means everyone can contribute. And accessibility for me is a really rich and positive mindset. Really, it's not just about going back and fixing things that are broken or removing barriers. It's about designing a world that has a place for everyone, and where everyone can be their whole selves in that world.
Michael, how about you? What does accessibility mean to you?
That was so well put, Liv. Better than I could have. I think growing up, I always thought about accessibility or really about fitting in. I would go to speech therapy classes, and it was about finding ways to fit in, to get by, to be fluent. But growing up, and honestly, through conversations with Christine, I realized accessibility is creating opportunities for everyone to participate, regardless of their ability, or including all of their abilities. And when you create events and spaces that are accessible, they're richer in ways for people, even people who aren't disabled. I'm thinking about an example of an astrophysicist, I believe in Australia, who was faced with ocular degeneration, and he had to find ways to make the data he was looking at sonified, so turning this data into sound. And so he created this tool to turn data into sound. And it turns out that people who aren't visually impaired can also interact with these data in this audio way. So it creates not only an accessible environment, but a richer environment for people of all abilities.
Michael, if you don't mind me saying this, had you not told me that you have been dealing with a stutter for much of your life, I never would have guessed it. You don't present that way at all. At what point in your life did either you or your folks first notice that you had a stuttering issue?
Probably when I was younger. And I have to say, I'm lucky, very lucky that it was caught, that Chicago Public Schools do have the kind of services that allow you to see a speech therapist once a week. I think other aspects of my identity, being a white male in the U.S., have also made my journey a bit easier. So I really just really started off in early elementary school doing speech therapy, and did it through the end of high school.
And it clearly worked.
It worked. Although,
good for you.
Yeah, it's never really gone, right? It's always there. You're always managing it.
Understood. Maddy, come on in here and tell us what the word accessibility means to you.
Sure. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Michael and Liv, for those comments, those beautiful comments. So I think for me, accessibility absolutely means places and spaces that are welcoming. But one really important element of accessibility, I think, is paying attention to our assumptions and our expectations of people. And very often those assumptions and expectations are based in normalcy or normative ideas of what people should be and what people should do. And, for example, when you think about a classroom, or when you come into a classroom, you might see chairs, you might see a blackboard, stairs, a podium. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, who is expected there? Who is expected in the classroom? And in a similar way, in the digital environment, when you come onto a Zoom room, who is expected to be there? Probably someone who is able-bodied, sighted, hearing, middle class, has access to technology. So accessibility, I completely agree with Liv about how accessibility, meaning love and freedom, I think it also really means paying attention to these expectations and assumptions, and in paying attention to them, changing them in order to achieve equity, whether in person or online. And just off the bat, that like some examples could be having captioning on Zoom or sign language interpretation, paying attention to people's time zones, and ultimately, I really think that accessibility isn't something that we can kind of check off of a list. It's really something that we do collaboratively and together, and it's a project that can never be finished, but always has to continue.
Maddy, let me do a follow-up with you on that, because we've had David Lepofsky, whom I talked about earlier, on our program numerous times, and he would just love the point that you just made, because we've talked about things like the designs of new subway stations, which clearly don't take into account visually impaired people, Or, for example, new buildings. When he showed me some pictures once of a new building where the walls were actually, I don't know if I can get my hand into the shot here so you can see it, where the walls were built like this, as in on a 45-degree angle, so that if you're visually impaired and turning a corner, you're going to bump your head as you come around the corner. No one thought, to make the walls like this so that it wouldn't hurt somebody who was visually impaired coming around the corner. My question is, what do you think it's going to take for architects, designers, city planners, people of influence to get the idea that they really need to broaden what they think of when they build?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Steve. It's very important. And, I guess I'll kind of backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about the assumptions and expectations that follow us everywhere and that are present in the environments that we're in. I think that when we think about disability, there is very often an assumption that disability is a loss, a limit, a personal tragedy, something to only overcome or fix or eliminate. And I think that fundamentally that needs to be changed. And that's what I love so much about disability studies, because disability studies really does get us to pay attention to the meanings of disability, the representation of disability, and the communication of disability. And I think if we can change those perceptions, then we can better come to understand how to create accessible environments that don't necessarily cater to overcoming disability or fixing it, but rather are really those welcoming environments. So I think if we want to change accessibility and thinking about accessibility, we first have to change the ways that disability is communicated, represented, and thought to be or assumed to be.
Yeah, I can think of David going to war against the Toronto Transit Commission for years just to try to ensure that the stops on the subway or on a streetcar or a bus were called out by a driver or by an automated voice, just so, again, people who couldn't see out the window would know when to get off. Simple stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's still having to fight that good fight. Okay, I can't do an interview these days, or at least I probably haven't done an interview in 9 months where the issue of COVID-19 has not arisen. And we got to talk about that now. Liv, I know there's this expression that we're all in it together, but some people are more in it than others. And I wonder what particular challenges the disabled community has had to face in this COVID-19 era.
I think some of the challenges relate to your last question. And the question, how do we fix it, really has to do with having the involvement of people with disabilities, disabled folks, in the design. That young architect is going to do what they're taught. And if there's no involvement and teaching around disability in their curriculum, which there currently isn't, then you're going to get, and in the regulation, you're going to get the same thing over and over. And so it has been with COVID. COVID unfolded very quickly. I think we all remember where we were on that weekend in March, where all the pro sports teams, and then Tom Hanks, and then suddenly a snowball of things closing down. And COVID has absolutely disproportionately affected disability communities. People have been more likely to become ill with COVID, but also, the social isolation has been absolutely terrible. And routines have been disrupted, care routines, support routines. People who live in congregate settings dealt with terrible outbreaks. People who live in group homes or other supportive housing couldn't have visits from their family for months on end. And then the remedies for COVID, for the impacts of COVID, have also been very challenging. So the government came out with the CERB benefit quite quickly. But for people who, in this province of Ontario, were receiving ODSP, CERB benefits were clawed back. So actually you would have people on ODSP actually receiving less than people not on ODSP. People had to buy their own PPE for their support staff and care staff on budgets
Liz, I have
that
to
are
put you on
already...
notice right now. Too many acronyms per square inch.
Fair.
Canada
ODSP.
Emergency Response Benefit, Ontario
Canada
Disability Support Program.
Yes.
And what was the third one? Oh, personal protective equipment.
Personal protective equipment. See, this is the world I'm living in right now. It's all these acronyms. As soon as you get government benefits, but essentially, the upshot is that people with disabilities actually got less benefits than people who don't have disabilities, even though we are more likely to be underemployed, more likely to already be dealing with food security issues. How do you add to your budget paying for PPE for those masks and gloves for the person who comes to support you in your care when you already can't make ends meet and already are having dinner hungry half the time? And another big area of concern has just been the inaccessibility of information. So information for everybody in society has come out quickly and with a lot of changes. Do you wear a mask? At first it was no, then it was yes. There's been a lot of changes in communication, but inaccessible information makes it so much harder for people. People with intellectual disabilities didn't get information. Some of them didn't know about COVID till quite late in the process of the pandemic unfolding. So there have been a number of areas that have been really challenging. Another one is testing. Having accessible testing sites is so crucial. And in this province and around the country, we really need in-home testing for people who can't get out safely to a testing site. We need to be able to have, as is happening in other countries, have a ambulance come that has the capacity to do mobile testing and test people where they're at. So it's been incredibly challenging. Even small examples, people who normally get their groceries delivered because they face mobility issues or other barriers, when the entire rest of society suddenly needs to get their groceries delivered, they can't get access to what the service they were used to. So all of these things compound and compound. So it's been really challenging. Governments have tried to respond. There have been some sort of one-off supports, but now the federal government is looking at income support for the first time. So that would be monthly support for people with disabilities federally, and that would be a very, very big difference. But I think there's going to be ongoing mental health impacts that we really need to, it'll be so for everyone everyone in society, but particularly for people who are already feeling isolated. I know at the JCC, we support more than 300 young adults with intellectual disabilities. And the day that everything closed, we got calls from families and individuals saying, my part-time job is canceled. My volunteer gig is canceled. The things that anchor my day are all gone. I can't see my grandma. I can't see my friends. There is nothing I can do. So we very quickly moved to online programs and supports. But again, that creates its own accessibility barriers. So you have to be able to have a program where someone who can't access technology can call in. And all sorts, you have to have American Sign Language available for those who need it, captioning for those who need it. So there's a lot of logistical pieces around supporting people. But, for some, it's been an actual opportunity for people who couldn't get out in the past. Actually, some people are more socially active online because there's so much more available to them. When everything was, you had to come in person to a program or an event or a concert. Now everything's available to them online. So that's been another interesting sort of side effect. So I think ultimately, we're talking a lot about recovery and building back better and all of these slogans that you hear. I think disability communities are still in the crisis phase. We're not yet in the recovery phase. We still have a lot more that we need to do to take care of people and to take care of each other.
Let's go to Michael, and you tell us, Michael, from your vantage point, what the impact of COVID-19 appears to be on the disability communities that you're engaged with.
Yeah, so the communities I'm most involved with, as you might guess, is the stuttering communities. And I'm involved in stuttering communities in Boston and Chicago. And we're seeing different kinds of impacts of COVID on the shift to technology, the shift to virtual socializing. So I'm thinking a lot about its impact on communication. I think for many folks who stutter, Zoom has been a challenge. There's a delay. I found my own speech being a little less fluent. I actually recorded myself the other day and listened back, and I could hear these as we say, disfluencies in my speech. But like for disabled communities in general, COVID and changes in technology and communication are going to impact every community and every person differently. Some folks who stutter have said that it's they actually feel less pressure to speak online if they're able to turn the video off, for example, or if they're able to text, in the chat feature in Zoom. However, turning off your video or using a chat function will have other effects for folks who might have other disabilities. So it's a real ball of yarn. There's no single impact or no single solution to address a question of accessibility affecting someone with a disability, including a speech disfluency.
Understood. Maddy, what's it look like from where you're coming from?
Yeah, I completely agree with both Liv and Michael about Michael, especially how you talked about that ball of yarn and how accessibility and both online and in person is quite, it's messy. There are things that there are considerations that we have to make that we maybe didn't have to before. But on the other hand, like Liv was mentioning, sometimes there is a greater online presence, and there can be more accessibility online, but at the same time there's not, like we have to think about like Liv was saying, captioning or sign language interpretation. And also then there's the question of, well, who has access to technology, who has access to the internet, who's able to schedule their time. Then we can talk about work-life balance as well, and people who have young children or members or disabled people who have to get to medical appointments, and all of these different, I think, factors really do intersect to create, I guess, kind of back to what I was saying at the beginning, how accessibility really is an ongoing endeavor that we have to work on together, and we have to listen to people, and I think part of accessibility is creating spaces, regardless of whether they're online or in person, of where people feel safe, comfortable to talk about what it is that they need, how they learn best, how they work best, how they communicate best, and just to constantly change and think about what's best for everyone.
I should ask the two OISE people this next question, because pedagogical hands-on education is certainly something you're in the midst of right now. And Michael, tackle this one first, if you would. How do we, well, let me set it up this way. I know next week on TVO, we're going to do a program about this, because there are those for whom the current accent on online education is not a problem, and they are hanging in there and managing. There are others for whom it is a bit of a problem because they don't learn well online, or they haven't got the bandwidth or the appropriate technology to make it work for them. And then, once again, I'm going to invoke his name, as David Lepofsky told me the other day. There's a third group of people, for example, people he represents, people with disabilities, who are really falling through the cracks when it comes to the new reality around education. Michael, what are you hearing about that? And more pointedly, how do we encourage teachers or teaching assistants or professors to create the kind of educational space that takes the special challenges that disabled people have into account at this particular time?
Mm-hmm. So for better or worse, these challenges around access to online learning are now coming to the fore because of the dramatic shifts that COVID accelerated. I think for a long time, folks in accessibility offices, folks in the disability communities have had ideas about accessibility, but I think now, because of this massive shift to online, the mainstream world is more willing to listen to possible solutions. So in my own work, as a teaching assistant or as an academic presenter, I'm making efforts to make my own presentations more accessible. And I have a lot to learn, So one example is when you're designing a PowerPoint, make sure it's high contrast so that those with visual impairments are able to see the text. don't put a busy background. Have, black text on a white background or white text on a black background. I'm seeing the integration of closed captioning into Zoom happening much more, which I find very encouraging. I find much more people talking about it when they're planning out conferences. And even making ASL interpreters just standard when you're doing an online presentation. So I think there's a whole toolbox of things that professors or teaching assistants like myself can use. It might take some time to introduce these things, but I'm encouraged by these small steps and small changes that I'm seeing now entering sort of everyday conversations around teaching and presenting in academic spaces.
Great. Maddy, what would you add?
That was great, Michael. Thank you so much. In much of my teaching and experience in educational settings, I work with very young children, so preschool children, nursery children, and to be honest, I think a lot about how the pandemic and the shift to online moving in the spring affected children, young children, and now in what children have to do in school and how these various changes are impacting their lives. I also think a lot about what like adults, like teachers, parents, social workers, what these adults expect of young children. And so I think in some of my research and work at OISE, I look at young children's storybooks, and what I'm seeing now is there's a lot of storybooks kind of coming out about how children might navigate health emergencies or COVID-19, and I think that those storybooks are excellent, and they are, speaking about accessibility and also teaching children to, I guess, understand their environments and these challenges. I think storybooks are great. And so I'm interested in kind of seeing how those might be used in the curriculum, and also how, like COVID might be integrated into the health curriculum itself. In terms of more kind of tangible accessibility services online, I think what Michael mentioned about having closed captioning, ASL is really important. I also find that in some of my work, I'm a peer mentor for students at U of T, mostly undergrad students, but also graduate students. And a lot of what they've been talking about is the time zone differences, and how sometimes if their lecture is live, it's like 4 a.m. where they are. And so I think it's important to really be aware of, for teachers and educators and teaching assistants, to be aware of where their students are, what time their students are expected to be learning, and to make those changes as necessary. So those are just my thoughts about coming from the young children's perspective, but also thinking about students in post-secondary education and some of the things that we are doing and that we can continue to do.
Good, thanks, Maddy. Liv, I want you to pick up the story if you would, because I notice nowadays we're doing it right now. We're all communicating on any number of different new platforms. I think 2 years ago, nobody had ever heard of Zoom. Now, all of a sudden, lots of people are doing it. There's Zoom, there's Teams, there's a half a dozen Skype. I mean, there's a half a dozen other platforms as well that we're all communicating on right now. How, in your view, how easy are these technologies to operate if you're somebody with a disability?
I think it's important to keep in mind the different kinds of disabilities. I mean, I think if we're talking about folks who have vision loss or low vision, or folks who are deaf, or need captioning for various reasons, there's a learning curve, and we've certainly engaged our IT team to coach families and individuals one-on-one. And I think people really need that, and our seniors as well. But I also think it's important, when we're talking about programs, when we're talking about classrooms and teachers, I think it's important to think about other kinds of disability, including intellectual and cognitive disability. I think, when you have David on, he will probably talk a lot about the absolute challenge of delivering either differentiated learning right now, which is where you meet the needs of each student, or special education learning. We're hearing from families whose child used to be in a classroom of maybe 4 people, and they're in an online classroom of 10 people, all of whom have cognitive disabilities and significant needs. And so not a lot of learning is happening there, and or at least not the learning that was expected to happen. Maybe other kinds of learning are happening, but it's a lot to ask teachers to master all of these platforms, and then to deliver the kind of education and learning that each child needs that meets them where they're at. And I have a lot of concerns about inequities in education becoming more and more stark during this period, both because of the kinds of accessibility you talked about, whether it's financial accessibility, can people afford the internet, and do they have the technology, but also because of the inaccessibility of the teaching in this kind of platform. It's very hard to do lots of the kinds of teaching that really are compelling to people who need more hands-on learning. So I think there's a lot to talk about here. And as this was, a 3-month period, and then a 6-month, and now a 9-month, it's a really big impact, especially on kids who need early intervention, who need support the most. And a lot of things, like we were talking about speech therapy, much harder to do online. A lot of the kinds of therapies and supports that come with the public school system are really either absent or changed and less effective right now. So really important to keep in mind.
So you do then share David Lepofsky's concern that there's a whole group of students dealing with disabilities right now who are absolutely falling through the cracks and are, really facing an urgent situation?
I do. I agree. I think, David is an unvarnished truth teller. But from my situation sort of on the ground, we're hearing from families all the time that this is what's happening, and that, they're not blaming teachers, they're not blaming even the system, but the situation has been extremely difficult. And there are kids who who have opted out because there isn't anything appropriate for them right now. There isn't anything that's working for them. And that's a big problem, because these gaps in learning compound, and it's harder and harder for people either to catch up with their peers, if that's the path they're on, or to just stay engaged and not lose skills that they've already worked so hard to develop.
Okay, so Michael, we don't want to name and shame, but we do want to do something about this. So what do we do about this?
Wow, that's a big order here. One, I'm not really prepared to answer. I am encouraged by, small solutions that people have made, though. Stepping aside from online learning for a second, we know that, folks who rely on reading lips, for example, folks who are deaf or hearing impaired, they were affected very much so by people wearing masks. You think it's hard to understand what the cashier might be saying at the supermarket. Imagine if you're deaf or hard of hearing. So some folks and some teachers have adopted this by using clear masks so that you're able to see what the person is saying behind that mask. I bought one of them.
Seems like a great, really simple fix to a pretty serious problem.
Yeah, they do cloud up sometimes. They're not perfect, but I don't know. I mean, I think the problems are systemic and sometimes overwhelming. But it's nice to see some small steps to keep us encouraged on this constant journey.
Mm-hmm. Maddy, you're doing disability studies at OISE, is that right?
Yes, that is right.
What does that look like right now? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think in general, I can talk a little bit about like what disability studies is and what it tries to do, and then a little bit about kind of what I'm doing, and also how that relates to COVID and the huge challenges there. So I'm studying disability studies in education, and I mentioned this before, but I look at disability studies and or how disability is represented in children's lives, and how this representation impacts children, how their sense of self, their interactions with peers, and I also look a lot at what adults expect of children, and so I look at how disability is represented, and also how problems are produced in children's lives. That might be disability being produced as a problem, or it might be foster care being produced as a problem. So disability studies, what it does more generally is it looks at the meaning of disability. So how disability is represented and communicated, and often it is communicated as a personal tragedy or something to eliminate or overcome. But disability studies really changes that. And then in terms of disability and disabled people during COVID and the inequities and oppressions that have resulted because of that, what disability studies would I think try to do is look at how disability is being represented in the times of COVID, but also pay really close attention to why is this happening? Like, why is it that we're seeing such inaccessibility and such oppression? Why is COVID impacting disabled communities to the extremely significant extent that it is? And what does that tell us about how we as a culture view disability and understand it? And how can we move beyond the ways in which disability has been subjected to systemic oppression, and also quite a bit of dehumanization. So those are some of the questions that disability studies would ask, and a bit of discussion about some of my work and what I do in disability studies.
Good stuff. Let me just take a short break here and ask our technical wizard, Matt, if we have any questions. We've been talking for about 30, 40 minutes right now. And for those of you who are watching this, if you have any questions, I guess they're going to come in. Here we go right now. Ask and ye shall receive. Is that how it works? Let's see if we have any questions from viewers that we can take right now. Now that came up for a second, Matt, and then disappeared. So do I infer, if there's nothing on there, that we have no questions, or that another switch didn't get flicked? I'm looking for divine inspiration here. All right, hearing none. I assume that if the questions are there and come in, Matt's going to throw them up, and he puts something up, and if there's nothing on there, then there's no questions for the moment, so I will just plow forward. As we, Liv, why don't you start with this one? As we think about moving into the COVID-19 recovery, how do we make sure, I mean, this is something that Mr. Lipovsky and I talk about all the time, and Thea Curdy, who's another disability support advocate, and she and I email almost every day, which I appreciate. She really keeps me on the straight and narrow because she wants me to make sure that there's a disability angle in darn near every show that we do. So good for her. How do we make sure that there's a commitment to accessibility and the role that that needs to play as we emerge from COVID-19? Because I'm going on way too long here, but let me put it this way. 30 years ago, there was a member of the Ontario legislature named Gary Malkowski, and Gary was deaf. And, I'd bet you $10 that services for deaf people improved because there was a deaf member of the Ontario legislature who saw to it that these things were attended to. I don't know that there are any deaf people in the current legislature. I don't think there are. I don't think there are any members of the current legislature who need wheelchairs. I don't think there's any visually impaired members of the current legislature. All of that having been said, how do you make progress when there isn't somebody from the community in that chamber holding people's feet to the fire?
I think you're highlighting two important things. One of them is a principle in disability rights, nothing about us without us. So the recovery can't happen equitably without the input of people with lived experience. We need to be asking people about their experience and what their needs are, and we need to take the advice of people with disabilities. I think you're also pointing out, we can design systems in two ways. We can design them proactively and with accessibility in mind from the start, or we can design them without thinking about all the different users and then have to go back and fix them in a reactive way. And right now, our world is sort of between the two. And the more we have input from the start to know about people's needs so that we can create recovery programs that take into account the disparities we've been talking about and the needs we've been talking about, the less we're going to have to go back and figure out who fell through the cracks, because they won't be falling through the cracks. We will design programs that have at least fewer cracks. So I think it really is about listening to the expertise of disabled community, and you need to do the same thing with racialized communities. You need to do who also have been disproportionately affected, and Indigenous communities who also have been disproportionately affected. If you don't have the right people at the table, then it's very easy, even working out of goodwill, to design systems that don't work for everyone and that are inequitable. And actually, I heard Carla Coltrow, who is the Minister of responsible for accessibility, the federal minister. I was really interested to hear her say this morning that she's moving from a model of talking about broken systems. She said, our systems aren't broken, and I'm paraphrasing here, but fairly closely. They are working as designed. They just don't include all of us. So to hear that from someone at that level of government, I think really marks a shift in thinking and in what we're paying attention to as we move forward.
Help me with this. I think Minister Coltrow has a disability herself, does she not?
That's right. She's a former Paralympian, and she herself is legally blind, and so brings that lived experience and the ability to engage with and listen to constituents and to people across the country. And they've set up a federal advisory committee. I think they're calling it CDAG, but
another great
Disability
acronym.
Advisory Group, another acronym. But the point is they are actually listening to people with lived experience as they try to put together federal programs. And that's where you get conversations about income supports for the first time, about actually giving people a monthly guaranteed income. So lots of interesting things happen. This has been a huge disruption. And in that comes the opportunity to build back, not just better, but to build back more equitably.
Michael, pick up on that if you would. Where do you want to go from here?
No, I really love all this Liv is saying. Yeah, I could listen to that all day, Liv. When you're talking, I love what you're saying about proactive design. So in my studies, when I'm not talking about stuttering, I'm studying higher education, so colleges and universities. And in the past, you might hear an administrator say, or an admissions officer say, why are there no students with disabilities here? Or they might say, we don't need, say, a ramp because we don't have students with disabilities. But it's a real case of, build it and they will come. Or if you don't have accessible, I'm using a ramp in a wheelchair, for example. If you don't have a ramp, a student in a wheelchair is not going to apply to the university, and they're not going to come there. So stop waiting for the pressure to do it, stop being reactive and be proactive, incorporate these elements of what they call universal design from the get-go. In terms of change, I'm most familiar in the higher ed context in the US, but to use this example of a ramp being put in, it might take several points of pressure for this to happen. You might need some student activism, maybe students who are disabled and their allies. It might take a sympathetic administration that the students or activists need to hold their feet to the fire. But federal legislation helps too. In the states, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that is invoked not just legally with the threats of lawsuits, but symbolically. Activists can point to that and say, this is what the law is, this is what needs to happen. So I think change happens through the interactions of many different stakeholders that have to be involved.
One of my responsibilities today is to make sure we finish on time, and to that end, Maddy, I want to give you the last word because I think we need to hear some last words about Christine before we wrap this up today.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen, and thank you, Michael and Liv, for those excellent comments about proactive design, intersectionality, as well as COVID and the recovery from COVID-19. So to end, I guess I'll just say thank you all so much for this wonderful dialogue. I learned a lot from it, and it was great to speak to Liv, Michael, and Steve. Thank you for all of your work and your time. And throughout the dialogue, in parts of it, we've really paid tribute to the memory and the life and work of Christine Karza. So the Accessibility Committee at Massey and the entire Massey community are committed to accessibility and equity. And Christine's spirit and fierce determination will be in all of the work that we do, and this year and far beyond. Christine truly did grace all of our lives and the Massey community, and this dialogue and its rich conversations are in memory of and dedication to her work, her life, and her love. So thank you, Christine, and thank you all very, very much.
Maddy, that was brilliantly said and wonderfully sums up the spirit of the day. I want to thank Liv and Michael and Maddy for being such great guests and for helping us through the last hour. As my dad likes to say, stay positive, test negative. All the best, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Massey Dialogues.